He offered his patched-up umbrella to a shivering woman on the ferry platform, not knowing she was the visionary behind a renowned architecture firm, about to redesign the map of his life. Before we continue with the story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and like this video. It helps us bring more stories like this to you. The rain fell over Seattle like a gray, relentless veil that late October evening. Not a violent storm, but a persistent, icy drizzle that soaked into the bones and turned the cityscape into a blur of lights reflected on wet asphalt. On the exposed platform of the Elliott Bay Ferry Terminal, the damp wind blew mercilessly, whipping the dark waves and carrying the salty, cold scent of the Puget Sound. Arthur Pendleton hunched inside his old wool overcoat, the collar turned, up uselessly against the dampness that seemed to seep in everywhere. He clutched a cracked faux leather folder against his chest, protecting its contents. A few copies of a local historical research paper no one seemed to want to publish, and a resume that felt increasingly like a relic from another life. 52. Years old. Former head archivist at the Central Library, widower, father to a distant daughter, and currently floating on the periphery of society without a fixed address for nearly 2 years. The thought landed on him with the damp weight of the night. The digital clock on the terminal wall blinked 7:53 p.m. The ferry to Bremerton was late, as it often was in bad weather. The cold had already soaked through the worn soles of his shoes and was climbing up his legs. It was then through the curtain of rain that he saw her. A woman, perhaps in her late 30s, hurried across the platform. She wore an elegant charcoal gray pantsuit and a light silk blouse, entirely inadequate for the weather. No umbrella, no raincoat. Her dark, straight hair clung to her face and neck, and she was shivering visibly, arms wrapped tightly around herself in a futile attempt to stay warm. She stopped a few feet from Arthur, under the meager shelter of the platform's overhang, breathing shallowly, scanning the dark bay anxiously for the ferry. Arthur looked away for a moment. He tried not to stare, but her presence was a stark contrast to the gray, shabby surroundings. There was an aura of polish, of purpose, even in her obvious discomfort. She rubbed her hands together quickly, her slender fingers looking pale and cold. He sighed. Just another cold night in Seattle, another wait for a ride that would take him to a temporary shelter or, if it was full, to a protected corner under some downtown awning. But then a stronger gust of wind swept across the platform, bringing with it a heavier spray of rain. The woman flinched instinctively, a small gasp of cold escaping her lips. Arthur glanced at her again. His overcoat was old, patched at the elbows, but it was wool and relatively dry inside. His umbrella, leaning against the wall beside him, was equally ancient, with 1 or 2 bent ribs but still functional. He could stay quiet, pretend not to notice, as most people would. But something about her fragility in that moment, her exposed vulnerability under the cold terminal lights, stopped him. He remembered his wife, Eleanor, who had always felt the cold so acutely. He hesitated only for a second. Then, he picked up the umbrella. The rain immediately began to soak his overcoat. He took a few steps toward her and held the umbrella over her head, creating a small refuge from the incessant drizzle. Startled by the sudden movement, she turned, her large, dark eyes wide with surprise. "Oh no, please. You don't have to do that." Her voice was clear, with a faint accent he couldn't immediately place. French, perhaps? Arthur offered a tired smile that barely reached his eyes. "It's all right. You seem to need it more than I do right now." She hesitated, looking from the umbrella to his face, noticing his wet, graying hair, the lines of worry etched into his forehead. "But you'll get soaked." He shrugged slightly. "I'm somewhat used to it. Please take it." He gently placed the worn wooden handle in her hand. "Keep it." The feel of the rough handle and the sudden relief from the constant rain on her face surprised her. She held the umbrella instinctively, lifting it a bit higher to cover them both, though he had stepped back slightly. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice a little softer now. "Thank you very much." He just nodded, folding his arms across his chest to try and retain what little warmth he had left. They stood in silence for a moment, The only sound, the steady drumming of rain on the umbrella fabric and the distant moan of a foghorn out on the bay. After a few moments, she turned to him again, curiosity overcoming her initial reserve. "What's your name?" "Arthur. Arthur Pendleton. I'm Isabelle Moreau." She hesitantly offered her free hand. He wiped his right hand on his damp trousers before shaking hers briefly. Her hand was cold, but her grip was firm. "A pleasure to meet you, Isabelle." She lowered her hand, still holding the umbrella. "You shouldn't have given me this, Arthur. That overcoat—" She gestured towards his. "Doesn't look very warm." He managed a genuine smile this time. "I'll survive. Couldn't. Just watch you turn into an icicle." The low, familiar rumble of the ferry finally broke the silence. Bright lights pierced the mist as the vessel slowly approached the terminal. Isabelle instinctively moved towards the boarding ramp, but then stopped and turned back to him. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "In this rain?" Arthur shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "I have a place," he said vaguely, not explaining that the place was a sleeping bag in a relatively dry corner of an abandoned warehouse near the train tracks, a spot he rotated with two other men in similar situations. Isabelle seemed to hesitate, as if debating with herself. Then quickly she opened the elegant leather handbag she carried, took out a small silver card case and handed him a business card. It felt heavy, made of high-quality stock, with embossed lettering. "In case you need anything at all, my direct number is on there." He took the card, slipping it inside his faux leather folder without really looking at it. He didn't have a phone to call from anyway, and he didn't expect to use it. People in her position said things like that, fleeting gestures of charity, or guilt that rarely translated into anything concrete. Isabelle hurried up the wet boarding ramp, glancing back one last time. The old umbrella was still held above her head, a makeshift shield against the unforgiving night. Arthur watched until her figure was swallowed by the ferry's entrance and the vessel's lights began to recede, slowly disappearing into the curtain of rain and fog. Alone again on the wind-swept platform, he felt the cold seep deeper. He shivered, but it wasn't just from the temperature. There was something else, a small, stubborn spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Connection? Perhaps. Or maybe just the quiet satisfaction of having made a small difference. A gesture of humanity on an inhuman night. He looked out at the dark, choppy water, then up at the invisible sky. "Maybe tomorrow will be different," he murmured to the wind, the words nearly lost in the rain. Then he turned and began the long walk towards his precarious refuge. Arthur walked through the quiet back streets of Pioneer Square, the lights from the few open bars reflecting in the puddles. The squelching sound of his soaked shoes was a constant accompaniment. There was no need to hurry, no one was waiting, no light left on in a window signaling home. Just the cold familiarity of the abandoned warehouse near King Street Station. He arrived shortly after 10. The place smelled of mildew, dust, and the faint acidity of seeping rain. His usual corner was empty. The others had likely found a better shelter or hadn't arrived yet. He unrolled his sleeping bag onto a pile of cardboard that served as insulation and sat down, leaning against the cold brick wall. From an inside pocket of his overcoat, he pulled out a small, worn leather wallet. From within, he carefully extracted a folded, yellowed photograph. His wife, Eleanor, smiling at the camera on a sunny day in Olympic National Park, her eyes bright with life. Beside her, their daughter Maya, then about 10 years old, making a funny face, showing off the gap where a tooth had fallen out. "Good night, Elle," Arthur whispered to the photo, his voice thick. "Good night, my little star, Maya." He closed his eyes, resting his head against the damp wall, and let the memories wash over him. He had been Arthur Pendleton, head archivist of the Seattle Public Library, a keeper of stories, passionate about old documents and the preservation of collective memory. He loved his job, the quiet of the research rooms, the smell of old paper, and leather bindings. He had a wife, Eleanor, a vibrant literature teacher whose laughter was the soundtrack of his life. Their daughter Maya had inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's observant nature. They weren't wealthy, but their life was rich with love, books, and long rainy walks through Seattle's parks. Then, one day, Eleanor hadn't woken up. A massive brain aneurysm, the doctor said. Silent, sudden, devastating. Arthur's world collapsed. The laughter stopped. The light went out. He tried to carry on for Maya's sake, then a 15-year-old entering a rebellious phase. But grief consumed him like a dense fog. He started missing work, making mistakes, withdrawing. Maya, also grieving in her own way, resented his emotional absence, his inability to be the strong father she needed. Arguments became frequent, bitter. He lost his job due to unsatisfactory performance. Savings dwindled rapidly. They moved to a smaller apartment. Arthur found temporary work, cataloging private collections, organizing files for small businesses, but nothing lasting. The tension with Maya reached a breaking point. One particularly difficult night, she packed her bags and went to live with her aunt in Portland. "I can't watch you like this anymore, Dad," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. "You need to find yourself again. When you're ready, find me." He hadn't found her. Shame and failure paralyzed him. He lost the apartment. He started living in shelters, then in his old van until it finally broke down. Now it was the warehouse, the libraries during the day to stay warm and pretend at normalcy, and the folder with his unpublished papers as a last vestige of who he used to be. Every day was a silent struggle to maintain dignity. He shaved in the library's public restrooms, kept his few clothes clean by washing them in a friendly shelter's sink, read voraciously to keep his mind sharp. He was trying to rebuild, piece by piece, but the road felt endlessly long and lonely. Tonight, the encounter with Isabelle, the umbrella, it was a strange detour on that road. Sitting there in the damp cold, rubbing his hands together for warmth, he thought of her. The contrast she made against the night, the surprise in her eyes, the way she held the umbrella. Why had he done it? Maybe because for an instant she had looked as lost as he felt. Or maybe because deep down, the archivist in him still believed that small acts of care, like preserving a fragile document, were the only things that truly endured against time and darkness. Outside, the Seattle rain continued its melancholy song. Arthur pulled the sleeping bag closer, rested his head on the cardboard, and closed his eyes. He didn't have much, but he still had his memories, his knowledge, and a stubborn spark of integrity. For now, it would have to be enough. Isabelle Moreau stepped into the private elevator that would take her directly to her duplex penthouse apartment atop the Lumina, one of Seattle's most exclusive and eco-conscious residential buildings, a project her own firm, Moreau Designs, had helped conceive. The quiet warmth and subtle white tea scent of the lobby enveloped her, a stark contrast to the night's chilly dampness that still seemed to cling to her skin. The night doorman, a young man named Ben, offered a friendly smile. "Rough night, Ms. Moreau?" She managed a small smile in return. "A bit wet, Ben. Have a good night." The elevator ascended silently, the city lights unfolding below her like a carpet of wet diamonds. She was still holding the old patched umbrella. She didn't need it inside, but she couldn't bring herself to leave it at the entrance. It felt wrong. Her apartment was a testament to her success and her aesthetic. Clean lines, sustainable, natural materials, bamboo, reclaimed stone, recycled glass, discreet automation technology, and a breathtaking view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. It was minimalist, elegant, and profoundly impersonal. There were no family, photos, no travel mementos, no untidy stacks of books. It was a space designed to impress, not to comfort. Isabelle dropped her designer handbag onto a quartz countertop in the open kitchen, and finally closed the wet umbrella, leaning it carefully on an entryway mat made of coir fibers. As she did, something slipped from inside the folded fabric. A small pocket notebook, with a brown faux leather cover worn at the edges held shut by an equally worn elastic band. Curious, she picked it up. She hesitated for a moment. Was this an invasion of privacy? But he had given her the umbrella. Perhaps the notebook had fallen out without him noticing. Carefully, she removed the elastic band and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was small, precise, almost architectural. They were notes, observations about the city, fragments of thought. Autumn rain washes the sidewalks, but not the memories. The library's architecture, a testament to the stubborn hope of knowledge. Saw a cormorant dive today, vanished beneath the gray water. Sometimes I feel the same. She flipped through a few more pages. There were quick sketches of architectural details, lists of books, quotes from poets she vaguely recognized. And then, on a page near the middle, she found something different. A haiku, written in slightly darker ink, as if added recently. Rain keeps falling down long shadows on wet asphalt. Where's the sun now? Below the poem, carefully affixed with a tiny piece of tape, was a small pressed wildflower, a bluebell, faded with time, but still recognizable. Isabelle traced the delicate flower with her fingertip. A lump formed in her throat. Those simple words, the small forgotten flower, they held such a deep melancholy, such a palpable loneliness that they resonated within her in an unexpected way. Arthur Pendleton, the man from the ferry platform, the man with tired eyes and a patched overcoat. He wasn't just someone down on his luck. He was someone who felt, who observed, who still looked for beauty and meaning amidst desolation. She looked around her immaculate apartment at the gleaming surfaces, the abstract art on the wall, the stunning view she often barely noticed anymore. It was the pinnacle of the success she had fought so hard to achieve. Arriving from an orphanage outside Marseille, coming to the U.S. on a scholarship and fierce ambition, she had built Moreau designs from the ground up, based on principles of sustainability and innovative design. She had won awards, acclaim, wealth. But somewhere along the way, the relentless pursuit of success had isolated her. Friends were few, relationships superficial. Her life was her work. She remembered a rainy afternoon like this one, many years ago, in the small French orphanage. She was maybe 8, hiding in the makeshift library, her only refuge, feeling invisible and alone. One of the older caregivers, Madame Dubois, a stern woman but with eyes that sometimes betrayed an unexpected kindness, had found her there. Instead of scolding her, she had sat beside her and handed her an old book of fairy tales, the cover worn, but the illustrations magical. "Books are friends who never leave us, Isabelle," she had said. "They show us that even in the darkest nights, there is always a light waiting." Isabelle never forgot those words nor the comfort of that battered book. It was a small gesture, but it had planted a seed of hope that helped her survive, to dream, to fight. Now, holding Arthur's notebook, she felt an echo of that old feeling. This man, a complete stranger, with his simple gesture and his notebook, full of quiet thoughts, had offered her a different kind of shelter on this rainy night. He had shown her a flicker of humanity she had almost forgotten existed, both in the world and within herself. Carefully, she closed the notebook and placed it on the glass coffee table. She picked up Arthur's old overcoat, which she had left folded on the sofa. She hesitated, then brought it to her face. It smelled of rain, damp wool, and very faintly, of old books, a strangely comforting scent. And for the first time in years, Isabelle Moreau, the visionary architect, the relentless CEO, felt hot tears well up in her eyes and stream freely down her face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of something more complex. A recognition, a connection, a welcome crack in the carefully constructed facade of her life. The next morning, the rain had stopped, replaced by the pale, watery sunlight typical of Seattle. Isabelle sat in her office at Moreau Designs, a large light-filled space with architectural models, sustainable material samples, and a view of the Space Needle. But her mind was far from blueprints and timelines. Arthur's small notebook lay open on her desk beside a cup of untouched ginger tea. She had read most of it during a restless night. His observations were insightful, his handwriting elegant, the tone melancholic but not self-pitying. There was a quiet intelligence there, a love for history and detail that was self-evident. Who was this man who wrote haikus about the rain and noted the Gothic architecture of a forgotten gargoyle, yet lived in the city's shadows? She pressed the intercom button on her desk. "Marcus, could you come in for a moment, please?" Moments later, her personal assistant, Marcus Chen, a young man in his late 20s, impeccably dressed and possessing an almost telepathic efficiency, entered the room. "Yes, Ms. Moreau. I need your help finding someone," Isabelle said, her tone calm but with an underlying note of urgency. Marcus nodded, picking up his tablet. "Of course. Name and last known location?" "His name is Arthur Pendleton. I met him last night at the Elliott Bay ferry terminal around 8 o'clock. He gave me this umbrella." She gestured to the object leaning in a corner, and this notebook was inside. She pushed the notebook towards him. "I don't know anything else. He might be homeless." Marcus raised his eyebrows minimally. Surprise was an emotion he rarely displayed, but he picked up the notebook carefully. "Understood. I'll do what I can. Any specific instructions on how to approach him, should we find him?" Isabelle hesitated. "Just locate him, Marcus, discreetly. I want to know where he is, what his situation is. Don't approach him yet. And this stays strictly between us." "Of course, Ms. Moreau." Marcus exited as quietly as he had entered. Over the next few days, while Isabelle tried to focus on a high-stakes competition to design a new maritime history museum, Marcus worked behind the scenes. Using Moreau Design's considerable resources, database access, city contacts, and his own investigative skills, he began to piece together the puzzle of Arthur Pendleton. The clues in the notebook were helpful. References to the central library led Marcus to check frequent user logs and even old employee archives. The name Pendleton Arthur surfaced, linked to the head archivist position, with an abrupt termination date nearly 3 years prior. He also found an old home address sold shortly after the termination date. Public record searches revealed the sudden death of Eleanor Pendleton a year before Arthur's dismissal. No criminal record, no recent massive debts, just a gradual disappearance from formal systems. Marcus used the location descriptions mentioned in the notebook: a specific bench overlooking the bay, a used bookstore near Pike Place Market, a church with peculiar architecture, and cross-referenced them with security camera footage and reports from social workers his team contacted discreetly. Finally, after nearly 4 days of searching, Marcus entered Isabelle's office with a concise report on his tablet. "We've found him, Ms. Moreau. Arthur Pendleton. He's been frequenting the central library during the day. At night, he seems to alternate between a few downtown shelters and an abandoned warehouse near the Soto district." He displayed a grainy security camera photo. Arthur sitting on a park bench reading a book, the same faux leather folder beside him. He also volunteers a few mornings a week at the Our Daily Bread soup kitchen on Cherry Street. Isabelle looked at the photo, her heart tightening slightly. It was him. The same quiet posture, the same air of worn dignity. "Thank you, Marcus. Excellent work. What would you like to do now?" "I can send someone to contact him. Offer assistance." "No," Isabelle interrupted softly. "I'll go myself." "This afternoon, to the soup kitchen." Marcus hesitated. "Are you sure? It might be unpredictable." "I'm sure, Marcus. Have the car ready at 2, and bring that umbrella." She needed to return the umbrella, and perhaps, just perhaps, offer something more. The Our Daily Bread soup kitchen was housed in the basement of an old church, a simple, but clean and welcoming space that smelled of vegetable soup and strong coffee. When Isabelle entered shortly after 2, the lunchtime rush had subsided. A few people still lingered at long formica tables, while volunteers wiped down counters and washed pots. She spotted Arthur almost immediately. He was at the back near the dishwashing station, carefully drying a stack of plastic plates with a dish towel. He wore a faded apron over his flannel shirt and seemed completely focused on the task. There was a quiet efficiency to his movements that reminded her of how he might have once organized documents in an archive. Isabelle took a deep breath and approached him. "Arthur?" He turned, startled to see her there, in this setting so different from the ferry terminal or the image he likely had of her. His eyes widened for an instant and he quickly put down the plate and towel, wiping his hands on his apron. "Ms. Moreau. Isabelle? What are you doing here?" There was a mix of confusion and perhaps a little embarrassment in his voice. She offered a small, genuine smile. "I came to return your umbrella." She held it out to him. "And your notebook. I think it must have fallen out when you gave me the umbrella." He took both items, relief almost palpable as he saw the notebook. "Oh, thank you. I was worried about this." He held it protectively. "But you didn't need to come all the way down here for that." "I know," Isabelle said, "but I wanted to. And I also wanted to talk for a bit if you have a minute." Arthur glanced around, at the other volunteers, at the pot still waiting to be scrubbed. "I'm sort of in the middle of my shift here. I spoke with the supervisor, Mrs. Henderson." Isabelle preempted. "She said you could take a break. There's a small coffee shop just around the corner if you'd like." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable being the center of even this discreet attention. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. There was a decency about him that prevented him from being rude, even if he clearly preferred not to go. "All right," he conceded. "I just need to take off this apron." Minutes later, they were seated at a small table in the corner of a cozy coffee shop, the aroma of roasting beans filling the air. Arthur held his coffee cup with both hands, as if seeking its warmth. Isabelle stirred her tea distractedly. "So," Arthur began, breaking the slightly tense silence. "You found me. I have to admit I'm surprised." "It wasn't easy," Isabelle admitted, "but I kept thinking about our meeting, your gesture, and your notebook." She paused. "Your words are very insightful, Arthur, and beautiful." A faint flush crept up his neck. "They're just notes, things I observe." "They're more than that." She looked at him directly. "They show a mind that sees the world in a unique way, a mind that understands history, detail, and humanity." He looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I used to be an archivist. Observing and recording was my job." "And why isn't it anymore?" Isabelle asked softly, but with genuine curiosity. Arthur sighed, his gaze lost on the wet street outside. He told her then. Not everything. Not the rawest details of losing Eleanor or the rift with Maya, but the essentials. The passion for his library work, the sudden loss of his wife, the overwhelming grief, the downward spiral that led to losing his job, his home, his connection with his daughter. He spoke without self-pity, with a raw honesty that held Isabelle captive. When he finished, silence hung between them again. Isabelle felt a wave of empathy for this man sitting across from her, whose life had been so drastically derailed by tragedy and its aftermath. "Arthur," she said finally, leaning forward slightly, "my firm, Moreau Designs, is involved in many renovation projects for historic buildings here in Seattle. Preserving the history, the soul of these places, is a core part of our philosophy. But I feel we could do more. Integrate the human narrative more deeply into our designs." He listened intently, his head tilted slightly. "I've been thinking," Isabelle continued, "that we need someone with a deep knowledge of local history, someone with a sensitivity for documents, narratives, and the spirit of a place. Someone who could research, archive, and perhaps even help. Our designers translate that history into meaningful design elements." She paused, meeting his gaze. "Someone like you." Arthur blinked, processing her words. "Are you offering me a job?" Disbelief was plain in his voice. "I'm offering a possibility," Isabelle corrected. "A position I would create specifically. Head archivist and historical consultant for Moreau Designs. It would be a challenge starting something new, but I believe your skills would be incredibly valuable to us. And frankly, I think it's a loss to the city for your knowledge to remain just in notebooks." He stared at her, the coffee cup forgotten in his hands. A mix of emotions flickered across his face: surprise, hope, and then the familiar shadow of doubt and fear. "Isabelle, I don't know. It's been a long time. My skills might be rusty. I don't know if I can go back to that world." "I'm not asking you to go back to the world you lost, Arthur," Isabelle said gently. "I'm inviting you to help build something new. With us." She took another business card from her purse, the same elegant kind as before. "Think about it, no pressure. This is my direct number again. If you decide you want to explore this possibility, call me. The door will be open." She stood up. "I have to go. But it was good talking with you, Arthur. And thank you again for the umbrella and the notebook." With a final small smile, she left the coffee shop, leaving Arthur alone with the coffee cup, the gleaming business card on the table, and a whirlwind of thoughts and feelings he hadn't experienced in years. The rain outside seemed to have lessened slightly, and a watery ray of sunshine was trying to break through the clouds. Arthur spent the following days in a state of internal turmoil and quiet agitation. Isabelle Moreau's card felt like a burning ember in the pocket of his overcoat. Her offer echoed in his mind, a strange, dissonant melody against the somber reality of his current life. A job, a real position, utilizing the skills he loved, within a prestigious firm. It felt like a dream, a mirage shimmering in the desert of his past few years. But doubt was an old, persistent companion. He would sit in the central library, surrounded by the books that were once his domain, and feel like an imposter. He'd scroll through old newspapers on microfilm and see only the ghost of the archivist he used to be. Could he really go back? Navigate a modern corporate environment with its fast-paced technology, complex politics, relentless expectations? He didn't own a decent suit. He barely had a functioning phone. How could he even show up for a formal interview? "She's just being kind," the voice of fear whispered. "It's pity. Guilt because you gave her the umbrella. This isn't real. You'll fail. You'll disappoint her. You'll end up back on the streets worse off than before because you'll have tasted hope and lost it." He nearly threw the card away several times. He crumpled it in his pocket, then smoothed it out again. He dialed the number once from a payphone but hung up before the call connected. The thought of walking into that sleek building again, of sitting before her and admitting he was scared, that he felt inadequate, was paralyzing. One afternoon, he found himself sitting on a bench in Waterfront Park, watching the ferries cross, the bay under a still overcast sky, the faux leather folder resting on his lap. Isabelle's offer seemed like a distant ship on the horizon, potentially magnificent but probably unreachable. That's when a phone rang nearby. Not his. He didn't have one. A young woman sitting on the next bench answered, laughing as she chatted with someone. Arthur looked away, but the sound made him reach into his pocket and feel Isabelle's card. Maybe he should just go there. Not to accept, but to decline in person. To explain that he appreciated the offer, but he wasn't the right man, that she deserved someone better, more stable. It would be the decent thing to do, he thought. Face the situation, even if it was to withdraw. With fragile resolve, he stood up and began walking towards downtown. He didn't take a bus. The walk would give him time to rehearse what he would say. When he reached the imposing Moreau Designs building, he hesitated at the entrance. The security guard eyed him suspiciously, but Arthur gathered his courage. "I'm here to see Isabelle Moreau. She gave me her card." Surprisingly, after a quick call, the guard waved him through. He rode the silent elevator up, feeling displaced and anxious. When the doors opened onto the executive floor, the atmosphere was calm, elegant, intimidating. Marcus Chen greeted him at the reception desk with a polite nod. "Mr. Pendleton, Ms. Moreau is expecting you." Isabelle was standing near the enormous window in her office when he entered. She turned, a soft smile on her face. "Arthur, I'm glad you came." He stopped in the middle of the room, clutching the folder to his chest. Isabelle, I needed to come in person to accept the offer, she finished, her eyes shining with cautious hope. Arthur swallowed hard. No. To thank you. And to say that I can't accept. The words came out in a rush, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. The hope in Isabelle's eyes flickered, replaced by a faint disappointment, but also understanding. May I ask why? She asked calmly, gesturing for him to sit. He remained standing. I don't fit here. I'm from another time. I don't have the tech skills, the corporate dynamics. I would fail. And I don't want to do that to you, after your kindness. Isabelle was silent for a moment, studying him. Then, instead of arguing, she said, Before you make your final decision, Arthur, I'd like to show you something. Not here, elsewhere. Would you give me one more hour of your time? He hesitated. Where? The Central Library, she said with a small smile. I think you'll feel more at home there. Against his better judgment, the mention of the library intrigued him. He nodded. 20 minutes later, they were walking into the magnificent atrium of the Seattle Public Library, a soaring space of glass and steel that, despite its modernity, managed to evoke a sense of reverence for knowledge. Arthur felt a familiar pang of belonging as he entered the space, the smell of books and the respectful hush enveloping him like an old friend. Isabelle didn't lead him towards the archives or the special collections. Instead, she guided him down to the children's wing, a vibrant, colorful space on the ground floor. Children were sprawled on cushions reading picture books, while a librarian told a story with animated gestures. They stopped near a low bookshelf, watching the scene. I used to come here almost every day after school, Isabelle said quietly, her gaze distant with memory. I didn't live nearby, but I'd take 2 buses to get here. It was the only place I felt safe, invisible, but in a good way. Arthur looked at her, surprised. I grew up in foster homes, then an orphanage after arriving from France, she continued, her voice soft, almost confiding. I never had many belongings, never had a place that was truly mine. But here, she gestured around, I had all worlds available to me. Books were my escape, my family, my teachers. She walked to a specific shelf and pulled out a slightly worn children's book, the cover showing a lighthouse on a stormy night. There was a librarian here, Mrs. Davison. She was kind, quiet. She noticed I came all the time. One day, she gave me this book. She said the lighthouse beam always finds a way through the darkness and that I would find mine too. Isabelle traced the cover with a finger. It might sound silly, but that book, that gesture, it changed everything. It made me believe I could have a different future. She turned to Arthur, her eyes meeting his. You remind me of Mrs. Davison, Arthur, not because of the obvious kindness with the umbrella, but because of the way you see the world, the way you value stories, memory, the quiet light that knowledge can bring. That isn't rusty. That's essential. She took a step closer. I don't need another architect who knows the latest 3D modeling software. I have dozens of those. I need someone who understands the soul of a building, the history of a community, the importance of preserving the human narrative behind the structures. I need your perspective, your sensitivity, your passion for preservation. This isn't charity, Arthur. It's a strategic necessity for my company, if we want to be more than just builders of beautiful buildings. Arthur stood there, in the middle of the children's wing of the library that had been his professional home for so many years, listening to the CEO of one of the city's most innovative firms tell him she needed him, not despite his past, but because of it. The walls of doubt he had built around himself began to tremble. He looked at the children reading on the floor, at the shelves overflowing with stories, at Isabelle, whose own story of resilience was as powerful as any book there. The voice of fear still whispered, but now there was another sound, the hesitant yet growing beat of hope. He took a deep breath, the air smelling of paper and possibility. He looked at Isabelle, and for the first time in a long time his eyes held not just weariness but a spark of rediscovered determination. "When do I start?" he asked, his voice a little rough. The smile that lit up Isabelle's face was like the sun breaking through the Seattle clouds. "Tomorrow at 9?" she suggested. "We have a lot to archive." Arthur Pendleton's integration into Moreau Designs was a gradual process, a delicate dance between two worlds. There was no grand announcement, just a small office on the third floor, initially furnished with a simple desk, an ergonomic chair, Isabelle's insistence, and access to the company's digital and physical archives. The first few days were about acclimatization. Arthur relearned how to navigate modern database systems, sat in on team meetings where architectural and sustainability jargon flew like exotic birds, and tried to grasp the fast-paced dynamic of a cutting-edge firm. Some of the younger architects immersed in rendering software and avant-garde design trends regarded the old archivist with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. What could a man who'd spent years cataloging books offer the world of contemporary architecture? But Arthur didn't try to impose himself. He listened. He observed. He asked quiet but insightful questions during project presentations. And he began to do what he did best: research. He delved into city archives, local historical societies, digitized old newspapers, unearthing the forgotten stories of the sites where Moreau Designs planned to build or renovate. For the new Maritime Museum project, he uncovered letters from 19th century sailors describing life on the docks exactly where the museum would stand. For the renovation of an old theater in Belltown, he found playbills from 1940s jazz, shows and interviews with musicians who had played there, capturing the vibrant atmosphere of the era. For a sustainable housing project in a historically working-class neighborhood, he researched the stories of the families who had lived there for generations, their struggles and celebrations. He began presenting his findings not as dry data, but as narratives. He created historical dossiers for each project, including old photos, quotes, anecdotes, maps of urban evolution. And subtly, he started suggesting how these stories could inform the design. Perhaps a mural in the museum lobby could incorporate excerpts from the sailors' letters. Maybe the renovated theater's bar could feature design elements inspired by 1940s jazz clubs. Perhaps the housing project's community space could have a garden named after a significant figure from local labor history. Initially, his suggestions were met with polite hesitation, but Isabelle championed his work, encouraging teams to consider his input. And slowly, something began to shift. The architects started to see that Arthur's stories weren't just nostalgic, window dressing. They were a source of inspiration that gave depth, authenticity, and soul to their designs. Clients loved it. Moreau Designs began gaining recognition not only for its sustainability and innovation, but for its ability to create spaces that resonated with history and community. The old archivist became a respected figure, sought out for his unique perspective. His once Spartan office now accumulated books, old maps, local artifacts, and blueprints that colleagues brought to him. The coffee pot in his corner became a hub for conversations that went beyond deadlines and budgets. Arthur was, quietly and unexpectedly, helping to reshape the company's culture from the inside out. Outside of work, Arthur's life was also undergoing a slow reconstruction. With his first steady paycheck in years and a small advance Isabelle insisted on offering as a historical research investment, a transparent excuse they both acknowledged with a smile. He was able to rent a small studio apartment in Capitol Hill. It was modest, overlooking an alleyway, but it was warm, dry, and most importantly, it was his. He bought basic second-hand furniture, a bookshelf for his few precious books, and an electric kettle. The most difficult step was reaching out to Maya. He wrote a letter first, long and hesitant, apologizing not for his circumstances but for his emotional withdrawal, for not fighting harder to maintain their connection. He mailed it to her aunt's address in Portland, unsure if he would ever get a response. Weeks passed in silence. Then one day, an email appeared in his new work account. It was from Maya. Short, cautious, but not hostile. She was in college now, studying graphic design. Maybe they could talk on the phone sometime. The first call was tense, filled with awkward pauses. But they talked. And they talked again the following week. Slowly, carefully, they began rebuilding the fragile bridge between them. Arthur told her about the new job, about Isabelle, mentioning her only as his kind boss, about his small apartment. Maya told him about her classes, her friends, her own challenges. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. There was still hurt and lost time hanging between them. But it was a start. A real start. Meanwhile, Arthur and Isabelle's relationship evolved organically. Work brought them together constantly. They spent hours reviewing research, visiting project sites, debating ideas. They discovered a deep mutual respect for each other's minds and work ethics, but the connection deepened beyond the professional. They started having lunch together at the small cafe near the office, discussing books, history, life in Seattle. Isabelle discovered Arthur's dry wit and vast knowledge. He discovered her intense passion for creating meaningful spaces and her surprising vulnerability beneath the CEO facade. They began taking lunchtime walks exploring the architectural details of downtown that he pointed out with quiet enthusiasm. One rainy Saturday, they bumped into each other at the Elliott Bay Book Company. They ended up spending nearly 3 hours wandering the aisles, recommending books to each other, lost in quiet conversation among the shelves. There was no explicit romantic gesture, no declaration, but they both felt it. An undercurrent of affection, understanding, and companionship, strengthening with each encounter. They were 2 solitary souls who had found an unexpected safe harbor in each other. A year had passed since that rainy night at the ferry terminal. Moreau Designs was about to unveil its most ambitious project yet, the restoration and revitalization of an old shipwright's warehouse on Lake Union, transforming it into a community center for maritime arts and history, a project that bore the indelible mark of Arthur's research and sensitivity. The opening night gala was a glittering affair. The restored space was stunning, blending the original industrial structure with modern, sustainable design. Interactive exhibits told the story of the lake, the boat builders, the fishermen, using many of the photos and documents Arthur had unearthed. The air buzzed with music, conversation, and a sense of accomplishment. Isabelle, radiant in an emerald green gown, took the makeshift stage to thank the team and sponsors. "This project," she said, her voice clear and resonant, "is about more than bricks and beams. It's about honoring our history and building our future. And it wouldn't have been possible without the vision and dedication of many people." She thanked the architects, the engineers, the craftspeople. "But there is one person," she continued, her eyes scanning the crowd, "whose quiet work gave this place its soul. Someone who reminded us that every building has a human story waiting to be told." She found Arthur's gaze near the back, looking uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo but with a proud glint in his eyes. "Arthur Pendleton, our archivist and historian, guided us through the past so we could build a more meaningful future. Arthur, please join me." Hesitantly, Arthur made his way to the stage through warm applause. Isabelle shook his hand and then, to the surprise of many, leaned in and kissed his cheek gently. A murmur went through the crowd. Later that evening, after most guests had departed, Arthur and Isabelle stood alone in the main hall of the center, now quiet, the soft lights reflecting on the dark water of the lake outside. "You were wonderful up there, Arthur," Isabelle said, softly. He smiled. "You gave me the chance to do what I love. The gratitude is all mine." They stood in silence for a moment, the quiet electricity of the opening night still humming between them. Then Arthur took a deep breath, his heart thudding against his ribs. He knew this was the moment. "Isabelle," he began, his voice a little rough. "A year ago, you found me on a cold, rainy night. I had nothing, except an old overcoat and a notebook." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, not for a ring box but for a small book bound in dark blue leather, clearly old but exquisitely restored. "I found this in a used bookstore a few months ago. It's a first edition of the fairy tales Madame Dubois gave you, the very same edition." Isabelle's eyes widened, tears instantly welling. She took the book with trembling hands. Arthur. How? Archivists have their ways, he said with a small smile. But that's not all. He gently took the book back and opened it to a specific page near the middle. There, carefully nestled in a small cutout made in the pages, lay a simple platinum ring, set with a single small deep sapphire, the color of the Seattle sky after rain. You gave me a second chance at life, Isabelle, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. You showed me that light can still find a way through the darkness. You helped me rewrite my story. And now, I was hoping you might let me be a part of yours. He looked into her eyes, his heart laid bare. Isabelle Moreau, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Isabelle couldn't speak. Tears streamed freely as she looked from the ring to his face, to the eyes that now shone not with weariness but with love and hope. She nodded vigorously, unable to form words. Arthur smiled, a radiant smile that transformed his face. He took the ring from the book and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then, he drew her close and kissed her, right there in the heart of the building whose soul he had helped rediscover, under the soft lights reflecting on the dark water of the lake. Their wedding, a few months later, was not a grand corporate event. It was an intimate ceremony held in the reading room of the Seattle Public Library, the place that symbolized so much for both of them. Maya was there, standing beside her father, eyes glistening, the reconciliation complete and quietly celebrated. Marcus Chen served as Isabelle's man of honor. The guests were a small collection of close friends, colleagues who had become family, and a few volunteers from the soup kitchen. Isabelle wore an elegant, simple ivory silk dress. Arthur wore his own suit now, well-tailored but comfortable. During their vows, he read a haiku he had written for her. Autumn rain fell hard, your umbrella found my path, the sun rose within. She laughed through her tears. When it was her turn, she held his hands and said, Arthur, you taught me that the strongest structures aren't made of steel and glass, but of kindness and connection. And I want to build my life on that foundation, with you. After the ceremony, at the small reception held in an adjacent hall, a special corner was set up. On an easel rested Arthur's old wool overcoat, now cleaned and carefully preserved under glass. Beside it, open to the page with the pressed flower, lay the small brown notebook. And next to the notebook sat the restored book of fairy tales. 3 simple objects telling an extraordinary story of how one gesture of kindness on a rainy Seattle night blossomed into love, redemption, and a shared future, brighter than either of them had ever dared to imagine. We hope you were moved by Arthur and Isabelle's story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let us know what you thought in the comments below.